I'm very pleased that you came to this session. It's going to be an important topic, an interesting topic. We're going to talk about meetings, how they've been shaping up in the year 2022, and what we can foresee for the future. My seminar is being organized by IAPCO. IAPCO is the International Association of Professional Congress Organizers. So we are an international group worldwide that is specializing in running conferences. We run just over about 10,000 conferences, well over 10,000 conferences per year. So the data that we have is quite extensive. Most of the things that I'm going to refer to are going to really relate to association conferences rather than corporates, but some of the trends are going to be universal. Who am I? My name is Mathias Posch. I am the president of International Conference Services. We are a PCO that works around the globe. I am based in Singapore. We also have an office in Tokyo, which I use a lot, but we have offices in North America and Europe as well. So our experience is quite international. I'm also the past president of IAPCO, which I just introduced. So without further ado, I just want to run straight into it and going to get started right away. What did we see in conferences 2022 so far? And I think we all heard a lot of talks in the last couple of years about what's going to happen with conferences. And now we have the first data of what's actually happened. So what we can see is that in North America and Europe, the attendance of conferences that were European and North American has actually been stable or even increased, which is a very, very, very good news. Which means as long as travel restrictions were fine, people went back to live meetings. We also saw that legal and professional conferences have done extremely well. Like those conferences have been seeing upticks in attendance. We've seen that they have been producing profits, that sponsors came back. All of those things have worked really, really well. We also saw, and this is an interesting one, that the fees for virtual conferences have increased this year. While during the pandemic we tried to keep fees fairly low, we see the overall fee structure for virtual conferences has gone up, and in many cases has been very similar to live conference fees. So many organizers have chosen to make the virtual fees very similar to the live conference fees. A few things that have decreased, of course, is international conference attendance. And anybody here in Asia Pacific can see the reason is fairly obvious. It's travel restrictions that are still happening within Asia. So China is a huge market that we're missing this year. We're still missing Taiwan, of course. We're also missing Japan to some extent. We see Japanese delegations being down with travel restrictions as well. We also see the attendance at virtual conferences going down overall. So as live conferences come back, people want to meet live. So attendance at virtual conferences goes down. And we also see a slight decrease of fees for live conferences. So compared to 2019, we see a slightly lower fee for live conferences so far for conferences that have been organized in 2022. I think that has to do with a lot of people being very nervous about delegates coming back to live conferences. So this is a quick snapshot of what we've seen in 2022. And I want to go into a few of the driving forces of what really makes the trends that we see right now. The pandemic is still, even though Joe Biden declared it to be over, it's probably still affecting us quite a bit right now. Especially with travel restrictions, right? I think here in Asia, we feel China missing. We feel Japan and Korea not being completely as open as they should be or as they were in 2019. Let's not talk should, but, and so that is definitely still a problem that we see. The second one that is maybe a more unexpected one is the really extreme inflation and rising costs that we see. And that impacts how we run meetings and how we can run meetings moving forward. And we see a lot of impacts on that. The second part to this is the shortness of staff. And that's one of these things that we are missing professional staff almost in every sector right now, which is also what was completely unexpected after COVID that this is going to happen. I've been traveling quite a bit in North America, Europe, here in Asia, and it's really a global phenomenon. We don't see a single market that's been excluded from this, and we have a bit of an issue in the capacity to serve. When I talk to hotels here, most hotels run at 70-80% capacity, not because they couldn't sell the rooms, but because they can't serve more people. So that's really one of the biggest issues that we're facing right now. Together with rising costs, that's really going to impact how we can organize conferences. So with that seen, we surveyed our attendees and say, why do you attend meetings? And why didn't you attend meetings? So it's very important to also ask the ones who used to come to your meeting, why did you not attend? The reasons for attending are obvious: networking and exchange. So these are really the two major things that people were missing over the last 2 years. We see that education can happen online. We saw that it can happen really well online. But two things that can really not happen as well online are networking and the exchange of knowledge. So you talking to your fellow professional that you meet, talking about best practices that you know, even talking about our experiences with conferences. I think the most interesting conversations I had over the last few days is, how did it go for you? This is my experience so far. What's your experience so far? And sometimes it just makes you feel good that other people have the same problem, so you don't feel it's something that you're doing, but it's a general international problem. But very interesting are also the reasons why people are not coming to conferences. And the number one thing that we heard were travel costs. And I think everybody that tried to get on a plane this year has realized flight costs have increased, hotel costs have increased. So we go through a lot of these conversations with our clients where we talk, can we reduce registration fees a little bit more? And I showed you that registration fees have gone down. That is actually a very dangerous precedent that we do here, because we also see the rising costs of everything. So if we reduce registration fees while costs are rising, we're actually running into quite a bit of a difficult way to manage our budget. But Delegated said it's not necessarily the cost of the conference that prevents me from coming. It's everything else, things that we can't necessarily influence. The cost of flying there, the cost of the hotel, and just rising living costs in general, with sometimes less budget that these organizations have available. So hopefully things will get better a bit on this, but this is a main reason not to attend. Travel restrictions. So I mentioned that a few times before, China and so on, still a problem. But the last one, job-related restrictions, is maybe one that's a bit more specific. So we see that especially in the medical field. If you work in medical area, you will see most of you will see a bit of a decrease with your attendance, and a lot of it has to do that doctors are still not allowed to travel as much. This has to do with a backlog in procedures, because during COVID, many of the procedures that were elective could not be done, were pushed out, so there's a backlog of that. Second, of course, hospitals are very, very careful to make sure their institutions stay COVID-free, so they still have much stricter regulations for people that work within a hospital setting, for traveling, for getting out to conferences, and all of this. So this has really impacted medical meetings this year quite a bit, and we see a decline in delegates at medical meetings. I mentioned at the beginning, we don't see that with, for example, the legal profession for exactly the same reasons, right? These restrictions don't exist right there as well. Some companies, and especially some pharma companies, still have a no-fly or no travel policy as well, especially with some areas. So that's really affecting us at this point. Another driving force, of course, is the war in Ukraine, which is impacting a lot of areas in Europe, but we also need to understand that there is a lot of areas of crisis right now where it impacts where we can do conferences and if people are traveling. Also, the issue in China, Taiwan, these tensions are impacting us as well, of course, if we look into it in our area. Very close by, we have the coup in Myanmar. That's, of course, affecting us to some extent too. But Ukraine has really put things into a different category because we, for the first time, see actually in a long time see Europe affected by this. And that has really shown in conferences quite a bit. And it shows in various areas. It shows, number one, who can attend. Of course, Russia, Ukraine, we're pretty clear that they can't attend most meetings right now. But it also affects more other kind of tensions that we see between countries and countries' alignments. So there is a bit of a sensitivity that we have to go around right now. So every time there's conflict, there's sensitivity with who will travel where and who will not travel. It, of course, affects where we can hold conferences. It's obvious that we can't hold conferences in some areas where there's active war, but it goes beyond that. We are having really a tough time right now in areas like Taiwan is big here. We're seeing a bit of a nervousness of some clients from some regions to say, okay, what's happening there? There's tension in the area. We also see issues with European countries that are neighboring or close to Ukraine. And one very good example this year was the European Society of Medical Oncology was planning a meeting in Prague earlier this year in April and had to cancel the meeting just 3 weeks before because the conference center turned into a refugee center. So even if your area is obviously a peaceful area and not affected by the war directly, there's indirect things that affect us this year, and we have to keep that in mind as we move forward with conflicts like the Ukraine war moving on. Who will attend? Of course, if there's boycotts and so on, we have this. And that, of course, has all kinds of impacts on destinations. Like I just mentioned, refugees and so on can impact your destination as well. Another big driving force that we see is we're all used to work from home. 2 years working from home changed our behavior in how we are willing to interact and how we're willing to consume things. So before COVID, there was an Ashfield study. I don't know if some of you are familiar with this. They usually survey medical meetings and survey delegates to medical meetings on their expectations and on trends. And that study in 2019 asked people, if you attend a meeting, do you expect the content to be online after? And over 80% answered yes, 2019. So imagine now, we're in 2022, people have gone through 2 years of getting every content they want online. The expectation that whatever is live is also online is probably even higher. There's no new survey yet, so I don't have the actual data, but I can only assume that the expectation is higher. And for most of our meetings, we do have to go through some sort of a hybrid format now, because there is an expectation that you can get your content live as well as online. But hybrid, and I don't want you to read this slide too much, what I want to make sure is it's complex. My message here is just hybrid is complex, and there's not one hybrid solution. It can be everything. Hybrid just means we're gonna do things live and in person and online. That can be anything. We can keep it very simple. We can do it as hybrid as here, where I give a presentation, you all hear it, and then there's a recording, and people that weren't able to see it live can actually check the recording later. Also, maybe somebody who's here might want to check the recording later. Or even you say, oh, there was this one point that I forgot. I want to check back on that. So that's the simplest form of hybrid. And that's actually still, for us, one of the most popular forms of hybrid, that people just want to make sure there is something available. But other areas are always also in live streams. And there's two ways of live streams. Number one is I'm here, the speaker, I'm live, and there's a live stream out and we have an audience somewhere else. That is, of course, a bit more complicated. It's a bit more expensive if we do it for every session. It also brings all other complications into the fold, like time zones that we have to consider, all of these things. But it's also creating a more of a community factor. So we've been doing this for some of our conferences this year, and the numbers are okay. I wouldn't say they're great for most conferences that we've seen. Not a lot of people tune in live. More people tune in at the time when they feel like it. And that is a bit of that Netflix model. People are feeling, I watch when I want, not when you put it on. And we see that quite a bit, actually. The second part of hybrid, which is the incoming feed, that is something we see much, much more. And what I mean with this is speakers that are not able to travel, we still want them to speak at our conference. And with previous conferences before 2020, we see that for a big conference with 500, 600 presentations, maybe 3 or 4, we've done via a Zoom call or via some sort of a live feed. Now we see about 20 to 30% of that. Of course, that has still to do with travel restrictions, people last minute not able to travel because their contact or because their institution doesn't allow them. But we see that being a much bigger factor. So that part of hybrid, of having speakers, giving speakers the opportunity to speak from wherever they are, we see quite an uptick of that. And we need to prepare for this because people are expecting this. So my message on this one is we have to plan for something. People expect that content is available. I am not saying that every single session will be expected to be live fed out, that we have to do every conference in a way that it's live and on a platform as well. I just think we have to understand that there will be an expectation for an online content that's going to be available. So what does it mean if we are looking ahead a little bit? So the big questions that we're really going to ask ourselves is, will hybrid continue to be the norm? International meetings draw pre-COVID attendance again? And of course, the big question about environmental considerations, will that actually impact our meetings as well? We see COVID is not the only issue we're dealing with. We're kind of now that we're at the other side of the pandemic, we're talking more about sustainability and environmental issues again. And will that impact our meetings as well? And one of the things that I always feel is very, very important that we start at the very, very beginning when we go through this, because we don't have a crystal ball, but one of the things we need to do is ask very good questions. And there's a lot of questions we can ask, but the most important question is really why. And I'm stealing this concept from somebody who wrote a very good book on this, Start With Why, Simon Sinek, who says, whenever you do something, start with why. If you can answer the question why, everything else becomes self-evident after. And in our context, asking why is really asking us, why do we do the conference in the first place? I think we very often just go back and put the conference back on without asking ourselves, taking the time to say, why are we doing this? And the question for some of you say, oh, it's obvious. People want to get education and people need to network. But have we actually communicated that to everybody that we work with? Why do people come to our conference? Why is it so important that we run this conference? Why us and not somebody else? And the second question that then goes a bit more detailed, why would somebody get on a plane, travel 15 hours around the globe, spend a lot of money as flight costs are going up to attend our conference? What is their motivation? And I think if we really get into that a little bit, we change the way we market, we change the way we go about sponsorship. It's really important that we are very aware what the motivator is. And soon we will figure out that the way we design our conferences has to change a little bit. Because it's not going to be enough anymore. If I say the reason why people come, why we do our conferences is education, my follow-up question would be, why don't you just do it online? If education is all that you care about, why go through the trouble of booking a convention center, having everybody get on a plane, travel all the way there, if what your number one thing is education? Well, then you will say probably, but education is very much what I learn from each other. Ah, interesting. Because here is the thing, do I actually design my conference in a way that this is possible? That this is something that's easy to do for people? Do I design it in a passive way, where I have a lot of lectures and reading, maybe some movies show, film showing, live searches, whatever? Or do I go into a more active area where we have discussions, where we have practice by doing, where I can teach others, where I have a more interactive learning experience? Because the lower part here of active, showing, doing, this is exactly what I can't do online. And if I do this, I actually create a reason why people will go and attend my conference and don't just do online education. The upper part, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying it's dying. I just have to understand it can only be one part of what we're doing. So when we talk about content, and I still think for conferences, content is king. If we don't have good content, it's not going to be great. But content with context. What I mean with this, I've been seeing lots of conferences where we had amazing keynote speakers. We invite them, we say, you have a 15-minute slot, you stand on, or maybe half an hour, maybe even give them half an hour. Stand on there, you give a talk, and then you're released from your duties. But it would be so much more interesting to go, and if I have a conference, a speaker like that, and discuss after. Do I have maybe a discussion? Do I have a workshop? Do I have a meet the expert session? Do I follow up on things? In scientific meetings, we very often have findings about a study, and they're not quite ready yet. And then our conference is only happening a year later, or 2 years later, and the findings came out in between, or the study was complete in between. Well, now with having the online options as well and people being used to it, I can do follow-ups. I can say, okay, speaker A just presented the preliminary results of the study. The final results will be happening in two months. We will have an exclusive webinar on this, and you will be the first ones to hear about it. So creating more context and not just putting information out there one time, but making it more of a journey and allowing people to discuss context and go a bit deeper into it. It doesn't always need to be with the speaker, but if it's an interesting topic, do round tables about it after and so on. Like, it's really important. Experience is key. And when I talk about experience, I really mean more than just a destination experience. It is important too. The destination experience is still important because if you look around, we could be right now in Las Vegas. We could be in Vienna. We could be in London. We're in Bangkok. So just flying people in, putting them into a hotel and then an attached exhibit hall or an attached conference center for a week is not going to motivate them to really go to that meeting because this could be anywhere. It's important that we actually give them reason to come to a place like Bangkok as well. So there's always the obvious attractions, which are the tourist attractions, that the first things that we think about, but maybe we need to dig a little bit deeper. And what I mean with this is experiences that are relating to our field. There's some really good examples for this. So the World Congress on Earthquake Engineering went to Sendai a few years ago. And if Sendai says something to you, it's because the 2011 tsunami and earthquake in Japan hit Sendai the hardest and was pretty much flattened. Areas of Sendai were pretty much flattened after that. What has happened in Sendai since then is a lot of re-engineering of buildings and making sure that buildings sustain earthquakes in the future has been done. So if I get a conference like that there, it's interesting to be there and be in a conference center and talk about it. What's more interesting is getting out and seeing what has been happening and getting people on a bus, driving them there, and make sure they get to experience it themselves. That is sometimes harder in a medical meeting. I do understand that, or a scientific meeting. But we also sometimes have centers of excellence that we want to showcase to people, that they could see, that they could actually experience directly. So we do workshops in hospitals and all of these things as well. But I think we really need to keep that in mind as a way to showcase our destination as well. And from a destination point of view, if we have destinations in here, we need to think a little bit beyond the tourism aspect, because getting people into our destination is like some really high up people that understand their field very well has way more value than them just staying at our hotels. There's so much value they can bring to us in their profession. So how can we garner that as well? This is a give and take. It's interesting for people to be able to have more impact in the destination, but it also helps our destinations. So can we garner their expertise? Can we actually make sure they make a difference in our destination as well? That could be patient days, it could be outreach, it could be them being in our hospitals or in our institution, cancer centers, for a week of exchange or whatever it might be. This is a give and take, and it could be a very good enhancement for the conference and for the destination. Immersive and interactive experiences, of course, we need to make sure we take advantage of technologies that are coming up. And VR, of course, sounds like a gimmick, but in some areas it's actually quite helpful, especially when we talk about, one of our clients is proteomics. They say through a VR, seeing a proteome in that environment, when you talk about it, is actually quite much more interesting than seeing it just in a 2D in front of you. Or when I talk about live searches and so on, I'm sure there is a lot more detail that you can show in a more immersive experience. And that could really make our conferences much, much more interesting. I mentioned networking before, and when I say networking, I mean purposeful networking. I can always go and say, let's have a nice reception, everybody get a glass of wine, and then talk. And this is the way we used to do it. Still valid, still good, but if it's a big conference and I go there with a specific idea of who I want to meet, this can make it very difficult. I could go to a conference and say, I need to find somebody to do research with. Or I'm actually looking for staff. I'm looking for people that we could hire for our institution. Or I need advice on a certain topic. The networking of just putting a glass in your hand and say, now find somebody, is not very effective. So we have technological tools. We have apps that can matchmake, we can find somebody easily, but we can also do it in a different way. I feel sometimes the way we set up our meeting spaces or our networking spaces could be different. So I could say maybe we have corners and lounges for specific areas of interest. If I'm an oncologist at a general meeting about something, it's a general medical meeting, have an oncologist corner, surgeon corner, a hub for nurses, where I feel like I meet like-minded people. We talked about the job crunch. That's a huge issue, not just for us in our industry, also the medical industry. I've talked to a lot of doctors who say we're missing medical staff, nurses are missed a lot. So a job fair, part of a conference could also be quite interesting. So not just say, okay, maybe you meet people, but we do a specific job fair as well. So think about what is the motivation for people to come and how can I facilitate that networking the best so they can meet the people they need to meet. Because that will be the main, if you go home from a conference, if you go home from IT&CMA, you say it was successful because, oh, I met 2 really interesting clients that I think are a great potential for my destination. Or if you are a buyer, you say, oh, I think I found the place I need to go to. I think I found the place that actually can do what we need to do. That's when you say it's successful. For most of our delegates, that's the same thing. They want to make sure there is something that they get out of it. They made a good connection. So we need to help them with that. Flexibility, I think we learned that really, really hard this year or the last few years, that we need to be flexible in how we create conferences and how we do things. We just did a conference in Vienna that usually has about 7,000 people. It's an international conference, so we knew we wouldn't hit the 7,000 because we are missing China, we're missing Japan. It will not be that high. But a month before the conference, we had 2,000 people signed up. And the conference itself, in the end, with the final count, had 5,500. So within 1 month, we almost tripled the amount of people that will come to the conference. What does it mean? Everybody had to be extremely flexible. Like, the way we designed the meeting rooms, we had to add space. We had to change the way we set up the meeting rooms. We had to do overflow rooms at some point. We had to change the catering requirements. We had to widen the aisles a little bit. A lot of things that we had to do because all of a sudden we're like, oh my God, we have more people than we expected to have. And I don't know if that's just a 2022 trend or if this is a more ongoing trend of people being a little bit more last minute, of all those issues that we see around, the war in Ukraine, COVID restrictions, all those things give people a bit of pause. I cannot decide quite yet. I need to see what's coming. So we need to be flexible. And one of the things that we introduced, for example, for many of our conferences is we charge the same fee for virtual as we charge for live, and we allow people to switch easily between the live and the virtual component without much hassle because there's no fee difference. So even if people don't sign up for the live one, by signing up for virtual, I get a bit of an idea what the interest is. Or if they're not sure they want to come live, at least I capture them in the virtual area. It's not a solution for everything, but it helps us a little bit in guiding things. But this flexibility will be there with us. And for us in the industry, I'm PCO, we have venues here, we have convention bureaus. We need to work together because our clients will struggle with this, and we can't expect them to know things when everything's new. So we need to work together and just make sure we keep in touch on these things. We have constant communication so we know when we need to change things. So a few points for consideration if we do hybrid meetings is that we need a slightly different approach for virtual than for physical attendance. And one of the things I'm very careful with is just assuming that we can just incorporate it easily. We had a virtual attendance right now. For some of our meetings, really make it an experience for them that they feel they're part of it. So in the Q&A session, we called them up on screen. There were people on screen that could ask questions. They could give their feedback. The feedback from the audience that we got, the people that were live, is they found that part extremely disruptive. They found it was almost disrespectful to them, making the way to go somewhere, and then we focus so much on the virtual attendees and consistently bring them in. So we're toning this down a little bit more. We're really saying, okay, if you attend online, you can attend, but we don't necessarily include you so much in our session live, because our goal is still to have you come to the live meeting. There is a online moderator as people that take care of the online audience, but we keep it a bit separate from the live audience, not to disrupt the live experience too much, because people that come live still want their experience to be special as well. Of course, we have to navigate time zones, this is obvious. And we want to make sure that our sponsors that do online and offline also get a good return on investment of what they do online. Sponsorship online is really, really difficult. We know that. People don't feel they can connect that much. And we see the numbers going down for online sponsorship, but there's still options for them to do that. And so we need to really take care of them. But of course, all these hybrid and so on has a lot of opportunities for us as well. It reduces the barrier to entry. We can have people attend for the first time. Actually, one of the things we discussed with the client is the developing or emerging nation fee being really, really low for online attendees. Not quite as low for the live attendees, because if you can travel, usually it's a smaller part of it. But making sure that people can attend from around the globe and make sure you can extend the reach of your audience. I'm not sure where I'm pointing, sorry. Oh, I'm clicking the wrong one, sorry for that. There we go. The other thing I really want to highlight here and really want to mention, which is very important moving forward, is environmental considerations. We cannot forget this. We need to do this because it's the right thing to do. I read an article, I forget the publication, not too long ago, that I think 60% of associations don't put environmental considerations into their decision making. And I heard a lot of people after saying, oh, maybe it's not that important yet. Well, it's not important because people want it. It's important because that's what the future needs from us, and that's what the world needs. And so we sometimes have to do it just because we have to do it. It's not necessarily a reason why somebody will come to your destination, but if you don't do it, it might be a reason why somebody doesn't come. I think it's something that's been seen as a necessity. And I can tell you for sure, we talk about shortage of staff. My staff would not accept us not addressing it. It's also something that there is a generation that grows up with environmental awareness and expects us to do better and expects us to do a lot. And for our industry, I think this is a make or break point. Because traveling around the globe to a conference leaves a huge environmental footprint. And we could be easily questioned on that, and things can easily go the other direction. I am a strong believer that traveling for a conference is worthwhile, even if there is an environmental impact. Because I feel we've been struggling for decades to get an equal playing field for people around the globe to have access to information, to have exchange across different countries, different continents with each other. So if we're now stopping to travel and we only go to our regional meetings, we're actually discouraging, or we're not allowing this free exchange of knowledge around the globe anymore. So I feel this is worthwhile travel because international collaboration is important and it lifts up many countries. But it also means we have to do other things. We have to do everything in our power to make sure our environmental impact is as little as possible. And there's a lot we can do. And I leave it up to you to think what you can do. But just to give you a few pointers, we can reduce waste, reuse conference material, we recycle, we give choices for conference materials and gifts. Don't just give out everybody a program book or different gifts. Give them a choice. Do I want the program book or not? Only print for the ones who order it. Or don't print it at all. Just put it on the app. Do you even need to give gifts? Or is that something that is wasteful these days because lots of gifts are left behind in hotel rooms anyway. Source local and organic food. It's not just great for the environment, it's also a great experience. If I go somewhere, I want to experience the local food, so give me what's close by. Donate leftovers, of course. Avoid transfers. Like, yes, people have to fly in, but once they're here, they can use public transportation, they can walk to areas so we don't need to bus everybody everywhere. Offer alternatives to exhibit builds. That's something on the long run we actually have to consider, because lots of our exhibitions are extremely wasteful, especially when we go through medical exhibitions. I often ask my sponsors and ask them, oh, where did you bring this booth from? They're like, oh, we had to custom make it because we couldn't ship it from there to there. So this is a one-time booth. And if you see some of those builds, you're like, this is extreme waste that we have there. So is there an opportunity for us to provide something to exhibitors that is maybe not a custom build? It's also really good for us as conference organizers to think of something like that, because if you think about an exhibitor, what is spent on an exhibit booth, only about 10 to 20% go to the conference. Only 10 to 20% are actually what they pay for the exhibit space. The booth builders, the material, all of that stuff, that goes somewhere else. The conference doesn't benefit from that. So if they have a budget of 200,000 to exhibit, only about 20 to 30,000 go to you as a conference organizer, and that's not a good return on that anyway. So if we come up with better ideas, it can help us as well. Avoid unnecessary travel. That means, do we need to go for 15 site visits or 2 site visits good enough? Do we need to fly in a speaker for just one talk? Or do we try to make speakers work a little harder? Say, okay, if you're already coming, can you do a talk plus a workshop plus something else? And if you're only coming for 15 minutes, maybe you can zoom in for this one. Just keep ideas like that in mind. Save energy, of course. So these are a lot of easy things that we can do that help us a lot. And in our company, we put out for every conference a zero waste goal. So every conference has a zero waste goal. I'm not saying we're reaching it. You're not always reaching every goal, that's for sure. But it aligns every single department behind it. So registration is there and thinks about, okay, if we have a zero waste goal, how can I reduce waste in my department? Program management does the same thing. Logistics does the same thing. Sponsorship does the same thing. So everybody starts thinking about that. And so little steps will cause, at some point, a great impact. Because, of course, this is teamwork. And sustainability is a huge issue for us moving forward. And we need to make sure we meet our targets as much as possible. So I'm just going to remind you to finish this up, that why is the most important question to ask yourself as we start, as everything starts with why. And I'm leaving it to you if you have any questions or any comments that you want to post right now.
Hey Mathias, I've got a question for you. I'm Karen from TTG Mice.
Hold on, I'm listening.
Okay, I've got a question for you. I'm Karen. Yep. So earlier on, you mentioned that virtual audience numbers have gone down, virtual attendance have gone down, but at the same time, international attendees are also on a decrease because of travel limitations. So it's kind of interesting because if people are not able, if not so many people are able to attend in person, wouldn't they seek out virtual attendance as the alternative? So why are both decreasing at the same time?
Very good question. I think one of the reasons is I think the people that can travel are not necessarily not able to attend meetings themselves. So you look at China. So if I live in China, my primary source of education are the national meetings in China. They go to international meetings mostly for international exchange prestige, being able to present their abstract in international meeting, and that's not given online. So we really see that is not really happening. And especially one of the sad trends, and maybe somebody has a different experience here. For us, we feel doing the online meeting gives a lot of opportunity to people from emerging countries. But especially from emerging countries, we always saw the lowest attendance in virtual meetings, even in 21 and 20. Like, those virtual meetings were attended highly by Europeans, by Americans, Australia, wherever. We didn't see higher numbers from South America, from the African continent, from areas that we were hoping to get people in, because it's my interpretation. I think, especially there, this learning from peer-to-peer is even more important culturally than it is for us. So we didn't see that uptick this year either from emerging countries. About the same level, no uptick. China not coming to virtual meetings because they have other options. Same in Japan, they have other options. So I think that's the problem. Any other question? Okay.
Hi, Mathias, Joaquin.
Hi.
Just a quick one.
No, we have time.
My experience before, to answer to talk about the emerging city, the internet in the particular destinations may not be as par. So that could be one reason. And there was one time we actually used the television slide. So before that, we actually work with government to send using telephone lines on the television broadcast. The other questions that I like to ask is about, we talk about sustainability. A lot of time, like how you as a PCO, would you kind of like encourage the organizer, how you convince the organizers to kind of like practice from concept to a practice?
Very good point. Thank you for giving the first point. I think it's a very important part that like internet is not the same everywhere, and the access to good internet and being able, not just good internet, but also having a quiet place where you can actually watch and listen is not given for everyone. Not everybody lives alone in a little apartment, but with big families and so on, so it's not always the same. Absolutely true. Second, environmentalism or sustainability. There is, I think the number one issue that we very often have is people think it costs extra money. And I think that's a myth, because we've been doing meetings in a green way and sometimes it saves you money. Like, if I go in and I say, okay, I don't do transfers anymore, I provide public transportation tickets, that's cheaper. Or I do things in walking distance, that's cheaper. So this myth that in sustainability is expensive, that's the first one we have to deal with. And that starts already getting clients on a different level. And then making it exciting and saying, if we set goals around this, it starts to make people excited. So even the clients sometimes get excited about it, because I say, okay, you can brag about this now. You can brag about being a zero waste conference. You can brag about certain things that we were able to achieve. That's usually when we bring them on board. It's sustainability. The other part of it is also well-being and health. Huge issue right now. And one of the things we just did with a client, we introduced a step challenge into the conference. So everybody could within the conference app, you could track your steps, and we had a leaderboard in the conference. People got really into it. The client loved it. They said, like, okay, we're promoting healthy lifestyles, plus this is engaging people, and so on. I think if you explain it well, if you make it a challenge, then I think there's a lot there. And be clear, this is not a cost issue.
I like that idea about the daily steps because it's something that a lot of us are doing. I'm also clocking steps here, 10K at least a day I try.
Yeah, and so if there was a leaderboard somewhere, I can tell you this would become a huge competition.
But Matthias, you mentioned a good point. I remember this is about the arranging events all within walking distance as much as possible to cut down on cost. Many years ago, when Adelaide started a new facility for medical research, they did market the city as a very compact city for them for people to walk from hotel to the convention center and even to the museums, to the special event venues, for example. Do you see, because of sustainability issues, that destinations that market themselves as compact are winning votes from PCOs?
Yeah, yeah, I do think that is it makes planning easier. It makes it cheaper. Look, this is not an Asia Pacific example, but Washington DC came up with the whole conference precinct idea. So they looked around the conference center into different venues and made sure that they are on board for hosting events, for doing off-site meetings, for all of these things. And what they did on top of it, they made sure there's one contact person that helps me with all of this. So me as an organizer, instead of having to go to all those different ones, if I have a conference precinct, I can deal with my person that's my contact person for the convention center that also connects me with the right people around and also make sure that the arrangements here are the same as in the convention center. So I think this is a great idea. Compact cities, very good, makes it easier to plan, makes for a good experience for delegates as well, and makes it cheaper in the end. I think it's something we should be looking into way more. Yeah. And also, look at it. I think one of the things, we're in Bangkok. I love Bangkok. I come here all the time. But if I have a conference dinner far away from my convention center and I have to bus everybody at 7 o'clock at night, I'm not going to have a lot of happy delegates when they're being stuck in traffic for an hour, right? And so avoiding this is really going to be good for everyone, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, there's another thing I notice also when I speak to event organizers is that they claim that delegates want now also an opportunity to be away from the big city, to be in an open space, a quiet area, as one of their maybe dinners or social. But if we are to promote a program that's all within walking distance in a city that's most established with infrastructure for events, would you find it difficult to identify such spots, such outdoor quiet spots within the city center?
The question is actually going a bit like the question is how much can you do in these social events and how much you're not allowed to do to begin with, keeping it professional. I think there's also, I hear what you say. I also feel when the conference days are long, people also want the opportunity that they can get home when they want to go home, not have to wait for the bus. So it's kind of a motivation of like, okay, I might have to get up early. I need to kind of get out of this meeting, or I want to get home just after the main course is served, so that's easier. I think these things that are more remote are something we can do before or after, give more opportunities. I'm not sure I want this in the middle of the conference program because I know what you mean, but with the white spaces, we should actually create them more at the conference itself, right? So give people opportunity at the conference. So if you are having a new convention center, give me some green space. Give me something outdoor. It's really, really much, much appreciated. We organized a meeting in Barcelona, and in the convention center, there's little green spots in the middle, and we decided to put some foosball tables out there and some lawn chairs, and they were overrun. Like people were just every coffee break went outside just to do a quick foosball game with somebody or just sit down for a moment. People want that part, that bit of turning off. Yeah. I think we have time for one last question, or yes, please. Do we have a microphone? Thank you.
Hi, Mathias.
Hi.
Ian from Conference and Meetings World. I just want to find out from how are staffing issues actually affecting conferences at the moment? I mean, that's a big problem worldwide. What is your uptake on that, and what are you finding?
Huge problem. And so the biggest effect that we see is actually the capacity to serve. So we've been going into conference centers that have huge space, but will only allow a certain amount of people because they know they cannot serve more people anymore. They know for catering reasons, for security reasons, there's only a certain amount of people they can serve. So that is the number one issue that we see. Number two, of course, it's also internally. Our staff has been exhausted over the years with COVID and like changes over and constant changes. And now we have to deliver with flexibility, with a lot of these things, quite a bit of work, and people are leaving. People leaving the industry. They're not leaving a company, they're leaving the industry as a whole. And you're absolutely right. So we as a company, we have the same issue. We don't take on every business anymore. We don't respond to, like, before COVID, I would say every RFP that comes in, if it's interesting, yes, go for it. Like, it's fun, we just hire more people. That is not happening so much anymore. That's a big issue. But my biggest issue is my suppliers. I go into a destination, I only can do 50% of capacity. I don't know if I get enough hotel rooms because the hotels run at lower capacity. So that's my biggest issue.
Yeah, we saw that at the site annual conference that they were hotels were having to turn away business because they cannot cater for extra events. They just don't have that.
That is exactly right. And I hope we're going to get that under control at some point. But yes, we have, some of our conferences here have delegate limitations, which we've never done before.
And one thing we have found from the UK side of things is one of the reasons that they are leaving the industry is a salary. They're actually finding better paid jobs. So is that something that the events industry needs to look at in terms of actually offering a better pay package?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And the question is, where does it end though? So does it also mean prices will increase, right? So there's if your pay increases, at some point prices have to increase as well. And I just, it's a bit of a slippery one. So we have to be very careful. But I agree, our industry is underpaid, for sure. Yeah. Any other comments, questions? That's it. Thank you so much. I really appreciate your time and your questions. Thank you so much.